Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me tonight. Got Robert Essig with me, author of The Circus Oasis, that just came out a few days ago. The Cyclopocalypse. How you doing,
That's
Robert?
right. I'm doing good, doing good. Good to be on the show.
Um, Here, let me switch view here. There, that's better. We're not so zoomed in. Um, let's get a little background on you. How'd you get into writing?
Well, I guess pretty much in high school, it goes back to writing a horror story about Thanksgiving that one of my teachers really liked, and I was an avid reader at the time. That's all. I didn't pay a lot of attention to what I was doing in school. I was reading books all the time, horror books. And then after that, I thought, oh, maybe I should try writing something. So I spent a lot of time kind of emulating what I was reading. So I was writing stories that were completely Stephen King meets H.P. Lovecraft uh, through high school. Terrible stories, most certainly. And I actually took a couple years off of reading and writing for whatever reason. And then when I got back into it, I started to look at it more seriously and kind of consider, if I start writing stories, how am I going to get these things published? Because I had no idea how people actually got a story published. Just did a bunch of research. It was somewhere around, I guess, 2005 or six, and I didn't really have internet because I was just kind of, I don't know. I guess everybody did, but I didn't.
I
So
did
the
kind
research,
of at that time.
you didn't? Yeah. So I think I was dating my wife, and she may have had internet access at my house for homework or something for college. I can't really remember. Somehow I got it. Anyways, I started to figure it out, submit my stories and all that, and learn a lot based on those submissions and the rejections. I was lucky to have editors that would actually, I was doing mail in submissions because I didn't really have email yet. And they would sometimes actually send me back rejections with a little bit of red pen on a couple pages, and that helped out a lot. So I kind of had to learn a lot the hard way, but that's kind of how it began.
Why horror?
I've always liked horror. I mean, since I was a kid, it was always fascinating. Even it's like little things like the creepy parts of a Disney movie, the ones that I remember. The witches are like I don't know, Snow White or something, where the prince has to go through these gnarly thorn bushes to get to the castle. I remember that stuff. I don't remember like the nice, pretty songs and birds fluttering around so much as I remember the other stuff, or like that's the kind of stuff that stuck out to me. The trippy parts and Winnie the Pooh with the weird elephants and stuff. That kind of creepy stuff was so cool.
Yeah.
So and then as I got older, I would look at magazines like Fangoria and stuff when I was waiting for my mom at the grocery store. I'd flip through those and just look at all the Leatherface and Freddy Krueger and stuff, and kind of wonder what's going on there. And it just graduated into watching horror movies, and at a very young age, and just absorbing them. And it's always been fascinating to me.
Was it like your parents were uh, open about it, or was it like super taboo and you couldn't watch that sort of thing? Like,
They were very open about it. I mean, I can remember some of the earliest watching like Poltergeist 2, and I remember sort of, I don't know, my mom was off doing something like, I don't know what, my dad was at the house. I think he was probably out in the garage, and I was in the living room, and I'd be skipping over to one channel. I go back to the horror movie, and I was Poltergeist 2, and the scene where the guy pukes up the giant tequila worm that he drinks. I was like, oh my God, that just freaked me out. And I was pretty young because, geez, I had to be 9 years old. We moved out of that house when I was at that age. But when I started to rent those movies from the video store, I mean, maybe 12, 13 years old, they were totally cool with it.
okay, okay. Was there what really like scared you? Like just kept like something that always is burned into your mind from like horror media, whether it was a film, TV show, book.
That we're vomiting up the tequila worm that seared into my mind at that young age. Uh, I remember getting, being very young and watching Nightmare on Elm Street 2, which is, it's maybe not the best Nightmare on Elm Street movie, but when you're young and you don't know any better. And I was watching with my cousin and she fell asleep. And I was sitting there thinking, shit, Freddy might get her, it might happen. But at the same token, I was like, no, I'm not going to wake her up. And I watched the whole movie to the end and I kind of was like, yeah, it isn't real. It ain't going to get anybody. And it kind of really changed the way I was looked at. Maybe it's part of what made me a big fan. I wasn't really scared of horror movies. I found them more fascinating. But I think sort of the real life. I didn't see the Texas Chainsaw Massacre until I was a teenager.
Mm-hmm.
The first one, and that one actually really affected me because it really seemed plausible. Like this could happen. These people really could get hacked up and find themselves at the mercy of these psychopaths and chainsaws and whatnot. And that was like, monsters aren't as scary as the real human monsters.
I got a little of that vibe reading the Circus Oasis of that.
Yeah.
The Granny Val and the family were just super uncomfortable. What's it like to write characters like that?
Fun. It's fun. I sometimes writing the villains, and it's more fun than writing the regular, the protagonists.
Mm-hmm.
Just because it's fun to get into the twisted minds of these people that are doing really crazy stuff. Like Granny Val, she was really nuts, sadistic, and it's fun to write sadistic characters.
Was there any points, because I noticed in your book you'll take it to a certain point and then you let the reader's imagination take over? Was there ever a point where you took it too far and you're like, okay, I gotta dial it back, let them think about it?
I would say not consciously, but I'm actually glad that you sort of noticed that, because I have developed a reputation for writing extreme horror, and definitely I write extreme horror. I'm not, that book I don't think is quite what I would consider extreme outside of those scenes you mentioned with Granny Val. Those ones, those scenes might be extreme, but I like the idea of bringing it right up to that point and sort of putting all the parts there for the reader's imagination to go wild with it. And I think sometimes that's why people will go, oh, your stuff is very extreme. It is, but I mean, I've read Edward Lee and stuff, and I don't, that's fucking extreme. That's really out there.
Yeah.
And I think maybe readers were thinking it was more than it actually was, although sometimes it is pretty brutal.
Yeah. I feel like when there's some points in extreme horror where it goes a little too far. I think that the reader needs to really think it through. Like, it needs to be left to the imagination, because it's a book, and you're imagining it as you go along. And then I just like that you would stop and then you're like, oh, that's bad.
Yeah,
really bad.
Yeah.
So how much research did you end up doing on the Salton Sea and all that? Because I was really intrigued, because that's something we studied about, that whole area of California, in a geography class I took like years ago, and I never thought I'd read anything about it.
I've been there many times. I grew up in San Diego, so I'd been out there as an adult. We had seen, me and my wife had watched a documentary called "The Plagues and Pleasures of the Salton Sea," narrated by John Waters. It's really good. I mean, I would urge anyone to watch it. Although if you go to the Salton Sea now, it's not like it was in the documentary. They've made a lot of changes to class the joint up a little bit. Bombay Beach in particular, which it features in Circus Oasis. So I'd been there quite a few times, and when I was writing the book, we went there several times. We went to what's it called? Well, in the book, it's called Damnation Mountain, but real life. I can't even remember what that's called. That mountain where the paint's all on the.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's
Oh,
got
what?
a pleasant name. I don't know why it's escaping me. But I visited all those sites before, right into Slab City, the last place on Earth, on United States that's truly free, I guess. That was kind of an interesting little venture. I think I might mention Slab City a little bit in the story. But yeah, I went to the locations that the story takes place. I'd been there before and during writing it, and it was, I guess it was inspirational because I'm like, I'm gonna write a story that takes place out here in the middle of nowhere. And the place has an interesting history, considering in the 60s and 70s it was a tourist destination until it got hit with just a whole bunch of bad weather and runoff going into the water and all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, the water's basically undrinkable.
Oh, yeah. And it smells terrible. It's absolutely horrendous.
Yeah. It's I was like, I think this is one of my most anticipated that they've sent me, mainly because of the setting.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
If you're,
we have a horror story at the Salton Sea. I'm for that.
That's unique, huh? That's different.
So, did you end up doing a lot of looking into like circus history in general with this? Because it seems like there was a lot of like thought put into how like a circus runs, because that circus isn't really like a thing anymore.
Yeah,
like that.
As is shown in the story. I guess I won't go too deeply into the circus because it's a little bit different, and I think that's a kind of a cool twist on it. Because I really did think about it, like, I went to a circus once in my life when I was a little boy, and I don't remember much except for guys riding around in a cage and a motorcycle, and poodles jumping and some different things. There's no way that they still have animals treated like that nowadays. So I had to really think about how I was going to approach this, because the idea for the hotel itself came from Circus Circus in Las Vegas. And that there's that clown motel I always see pictures of that's somewhere in the desert that looks creepy as hell. So those kind of things sort of came together, and I thought, ooh, a circus themed hotel out in the middle of the desert, and it just kind of recreating history as if this thing actually existed in the 70s. I did a little bit of research on circuses. I read a great book that's similar to circuses. It had to do with carnivals. It's called Carnival. I think that's the title. It was written in the 70s. And this guy who wrote the book, he had traveled with first, second, and third rate carnivals for a period of 5 years or something, researching for the book. And it was fascinating. I love that book. And so a lot came from reading that. I mean, I'd read it years ago, but a lot of it stuck with me.
So at its core, this is a ghost story. And
absolutely.
I was so worried in the first couple chapters this was going to be The Shining. Thank you for not doing that. But because I mean, like we got haunting, there's a hotel, we got a kid that may or may not have psychic powers, which I like that you go a completely different direction with it. But I do have to ask, you mentioned Stephen King. Did you use The Shining a little bit as inspiration?
I didn't. And I'll tell you what, I've read probably 45 Stephen King books or so, somewhere around that. And The Shining's one that I didn't finish. I didn't really care for the book.
Okay.
It's a very popular. I didn't care for it. And I read a lot of those books when I was a teenager, and I would blow through them. I had a lot of time to read, and it just people talk about Stephen King can't nail the ending, this or that. I don't know. I always liked them. I read that as an adult, and I didn't care for it for whatever reason. So I will say I love the movie, and I think that's wise. I'd seen the movie so many times. I'm a fan of the movie, and the book was so different that my brain was having a hard time processing it. And I think that's what the problem was. I kind of wish I had read it first.
For sure. You see, I'm the reverse. I have a Stephen King podcast.
Oh, yeah.
We reviewed The Shining, I think, a couple months ago. And I'm more of the book. I like the visuals in the novel, because the with Stephen King, it's just half of what he writes is unfilmable for various reasons. I mean, with it it is a copyright
Yeah.
claim.
Yeah,
It's
that's
just
funny.
that'd be an NC-17 movie if try.
Oh,
No one would produce it. But
no, no.
yeah, how did you approach a ghost story? Because ghost stories to me are a very common sort of horror that's been a thing for forever. I brought this up in my review that the ghost stories have been like popular since early 1900s
Oh, yeah.
and stuff. How do you take a subgenre like that and you keep it fresh?
Well, I mean, I love a good haunted house story, but at the same token, I hate a bad haunted house movie. There's so many of them.
Yeah.
I'm so tired of the same crap in movies. And it's funny, I didn't even see until your review the parallel of the whole it's a ghost story and it takes place in a hotel. Ooh, Shining. It's like, oh, you mentioned that, and I really thought, wow, I didn't even notice that. And it started making me a little nervous. I had to think about the plot, like, whoa, did I subconsciously draw like a lot from that? And I didn't, I don't think.
No.
Yeah, because it does go in a different direction, and without giving away the ending, because I think the ending is a very important part of what I was going after
Mhm.
with the whole haunting thing. There's a specific haunting going on, and I kind of had that in mind. I kind of had that ending based on the history of that particular hotel. Going, that's going to be my way to write a ghost story. That's going to be hopefully a little fresh and different, and new.
Okay.
Because
Well,
that ending, I could see it. It's like, oh, that's okay. I got it.
okay. Because I mentioned that the last few chapters are just the best chaos you can have in a horror book novel. I intentionally didn't say what the chaos was, but I feel
Yeah,
like when you have a story like this, you have to have some element of just pure, utter chaos. And you
yeah,
had that in mind from the beginning, then.
I
With
did.
okay, is
I yeah, that I had the ending in mind from the beginning, and I wanted, my idea was that the reader might not know, you may not know what type of story it is from the beginning. There's little, I was hoping I was dropping, obviously I was dropping hints. It wasn't that far fetched that it's a ghost story or something, right? I'm not that skilled of a writer, but I didn't want it to be totally understood what exactly was going on until it really revealed itself in the end. I was hoping for some ambiguity with some of that stuff. But yeah, I had that ending was what I was just sort of plowing away to get to that.
so let me ask you this. Is that a common thing with your writing where you know the ending before you even start?
My wife eavesdropping in my interview.
Oh,
Give me
no
one
problem.
second, please.
No problem. No problem.
All right, apology.
Oh,
Um,
that's fine.
no, it's yeah. Over the years, I've written my books in a variety of different ways,
Mm.
and I used to be a pantser. I would just start with an idea, and I would sort of just write on it, and I'd get stuck. I used to live in San Diego, and I'd be in traffic to and from work every day, and I would utilize that time to get unstuck. But um, I don't have traffic on my way to work or anything anymore, and I don't like being stuck. So I've streamlined my writing process, and I outline a lot more than I used to, but not necessarily to the end. I rarely ever know the end, so that was unusual for me.
Okay. Well, let's just break down your process if you don't mind of how you approach a new you're going to write a book, whether it's a novella, a novel, that sort of thing. What do you usually what are the steps you take?
Well, pretty much I get an idea, obviously. that I think is cool enough to work with, and I kind of brainstorm on it in my head while I'm at work or just idle time to think, and I get enough to where I feel good about it. At least starting the story, I'll just start from chapter 1 or what have you, and start writing on that, and take it until I kind of get stuck. And because I'm pretty disciplined, I wake up at 5:25 every morning. I write for right up until I need to get ready for work. Do it every day. I want to know what I'm doing because that's my writing time, and I want to use every second of it as wisely as possible. So once I kind of get stuck or whatever, I'm starting to think about where this story's going to go. I will take another document and maybe I got to chapter 3. I'll just write 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, whatever, and I'll do anything from a single line to a paragraph of where I think the next chapter should go, and I'll sort of work through that and kind of rearrange things, and I might only do that maybe 5, 6 chapters from the point I'm at. I'll write those, kind of see where things progress, and then I'll outline maybe the next 5 or 6 chapters until I get to the end. Now, sometimes I start to see what's going to happen, and I'll outline a lot further. But that's pretty much the process. It works really well for me, and I can utilize my writing time really nicely.
Now, do you ever just work a story and then you can't finish it for whatever reason, and then do you just put it on hold? Do you just give up and move on to something else? Like what happens when you because get the classic of writer's block?
Oh, I definitely. I have a file. I have like a works stories that I'm working on file, stories that are finished file, and then stories that are ready to submit file. So that first file has tons of stories that I never finished. Couldn't figure out where it was going. Whether it's a short story, I've got plenty of novel length stories that I might have gotten 20,000 words and just kind of, well, sometimes something shiny, oh, that's a much better idea, and then I'll go write that. I figure I'll come back to it sometime. I have stories I kind of can't wait to get back to, but I've had other obligations, or there's so many things that I want to write, so I really don't have any kind of writer's block. There's too much stuff, and I kind of have to put my focus in certain areas, and so other things get kind of forgotten about a little bit.
Sure. How'd you get involved with Encyclopocalypse?
That kind of came from the whole Silver Shamrock meltdown that happened. I don't know if you're familiar with that. Silver Shamrock Publishing.
A little bit, but for those who aren't aware.
Yeah. I was a publishing company that, I don't remember exactly what it was, but some kind of controversy that just caused them to shut everything down like real suddenly. Just one day it's like, oh, sent off some kind of, controversial tweet or post or whatever, and we're shutting everything down. And there's a lot of authors that were published with them. I had a book under consideration with them, in a short story for an anthology that was under consideration. I was just kind of like, they'd had it for a long time, that book. So I was like, oh man, I was hoping for good news about that after all this time of waiting. And then Sean Durger from Encyclopocalypse reached out to me, and he said, hey, let me take a look at that. Maybe we can publish it here in Encyclopocalypse. And I said, sure thing. I sent him that and another book, Mojave Mud Caves, and they took both of them. So that's kind of how that happened.
All right. How you like it over there?
It's been great. Sean has been awesome. I mean, I feel like he's not just a publisher, but a publicist as well, because he's been hooking me up with podcast interviews, and he's really been pushing the book, a lot. The book came out, and it got a little tag on it saying, that it's the #1 in American horror new release, which is pretty cool. I've never had a book that got recognized as a #1 new release in American horror. So that's, there's been we've been trying to get the word out, and he's been helping out a lot with that. And that's awesome, because some publishers don't do as much. And I think I work with a lot of good publishers, and I'm definitely happy with them.
Yeah, Sean goes above and beyond with everything.
He sure does.
Yeah. He's a really cool dude. Are you going to end up with an audiobook for this Circus Oasis?
It sounds like it. It sounds like I believe Sean was saying they're going to start looking for somebody to read the audiobook. That'd be great. I only have, out of 15 or 16 books, only have one that was ever turned to an audiobook years ago. So I'm about due for another one. So I sure hope so.
There you go. Would you ever do? I know there's some of the authors like Christian Francis reads his own books for the Audible releases. Is that something you would do?
Not a chance.
I feel that. I feel that. Reading out loud, that is a whole nother skill aside from I do the YouTube stuff, but like I never write a script. If I was reading, it'd be a nightmare.
Right. I've listened to one of Sean's narrations, the Killer Flies. I listened to that, and he did a great job. He's got a knack for it. There's not a chance. I've read my own. I've never done a live reading yet. I've read to some friends, writer friends in San Diego. We get together sometimes, and I once did a short story reading, and afterwards I was like, oh man, I'm glad I didn't do this in front of a big old room full of people, because you start tripping over words, and once you start to trip over one word, it gets in your head,
Yeah, and I can't imagine how many takes you do, just chapter to chapter.
Yeah.
Oh, because you got to have that at least a smooth recording. There's not a lot of wiggle room. I have a degree in film, and like in editing, and like I can't hear a lot of audio editing when they do that. So that just seems like, to me personally,
you have an ear for it to where you can actually sort of every once, because I listen on headphones at work. I will go, oh, I think I just heard I can tell a little difference. I think they cut that right there.
Occasionally, it depends. Unless it's a Star Wars book, where Star Wars, they have the John Williams theme, they got sound effects, they got all sorts of stuff like that. That's really hard to like listen critically to like edit, because there's so many different tracks of audio at the same time. But I just early this year I listened to Dune for the first time, and the Dune audiobook is kind of like that, but they have different narrators. So some of it's kind of audio drama, but it's unabridged Dune, which I recommend it even if you're not like a science fiction fan. It's a fascinating listen. I mean,
I'm big on audiobooks, and that sounds interesting. I'd listen to that. I listen to sci-fi and horror, thriller, whatever.
All right. What are you currently reading right now? I ask this to everyone because I'm always curious what people are reading.
Let's see. What am I reading at the moment? I'm reading Borderlands 5 anthology. I'm reading older books right now. I don't think I'm reading Borderlands 5. I was published in like 2003 or something, collection of short stories. I just started that. I'd finished the first Borderland volume a couple weeks ago, and I liked it a lot. And The Fog by James Herbert, which, geez, that's an old book, which is pretty good.
Is that the
audiobook? The what?
Is that the novelization to the Carpenter film?
No. The Dennis Etchison wrote the novelization to the Carpenter film. This is a book published in like 74 or 5 by James Herbert. It's a totally different story.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's like an earthquake out in the moors or something in the UK that a fog comes out of, and it starts to make people crazy. It's pretty good so far. It's a classic.
There you go. It reminds me of Floating Dragon by Peter Straub.
I haven't read that one.
I honestly, I think it's one of his better books, where as I believe it's a nuclear test goes wrong, and there ends up being like a radiation cloud that goes over a town, and they start going crazy.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah. Peter Straub for me is like hit or miss. I just read Julia, which is another ghost story. That's why the ghost story thing was in my head.
Right.
I read Julia, which was
I tried to read that one years ago, and I didn't get all the way through it.
It's so like I say this as like I enjoy like the early Stephen King stuff, like with like Carrie and like Salem's Lot, where you have like old tech in your book, but like that doesn't dominate it. And in Julia, it just feels dated. It
Oh yeah.
feels like a product of like the '60s.
Right.
There's
Yeah,
like
that could bog a story down nowadays.
like to the point where like some of the stuff I was like, I don't know what they're talking about, and I have to go look it up, and not in a good way.
Right. Yeah.
Like it's just a bit too much. Um, Let me ask you this: how do you write to something that's timeless? Since we're at this, how do you approach something like when they say that something's like, oh, that's a classic, it's timeless. Like how do you think that you get to that status?
And I don't know. That's a good question. Um, Shoot, how does something timeless? I mean, I guess it takes. I don't want to say popularity. It takes people knowing it. Obviously, if no one knows about the piece of fiction or whatever, it's not going to be timeless because it'd be lost in time.
Uh-huh.
But that's a good point about the that Julia having a lot of technology from that time.
Mhm.
And it's a tough one. I like reading older books, and they'll have the jargon of the time. It sort of can turn it into a period piece, even though it was written in that time as a current piece,
Mhm.
but nobody's thinking about it at that time. Kind of
Yeah,
a weird tangent.
because like Circus Oasis, it feels to me a bit timeless. Like you don't focus on. I mean, yeah, there's cell phones. There's mention of a tablet, but like that's not the point. And I feel like
Yeah,
it has to be part of it. Like you can't be bogged down with the times. Like there isn't. There's a little references to the recession,
yeah.
but like
Which probably goes to when I wrote the book, because I didn't just write it last year. I wrote it years ago.
really.
Not years ago, but probably 4 or 5 years ago, because it sat at Silver Shamrock for years. That's a whole nother story I don't want to get into, but it
Okay.
sat there for a little while, so it had been written, and that's why that plays a bigger part in it. And I was kind of concerned about that. Well, the recession was a little bit of time ago, and I thought, well, it's a historic thing. It happened. I mean, I could stamp the beginning of the book as this takes place in the year 2013 or something if I wanted to, but I figured it doesn't. It's not that important to the story necessarily that you're going to be lost because you're not sure if the recession was going on.
Yeah, there's no mention of going onto Facebook, you know.
Right.
Or something.
We logged on to MySpace. Whoa.
I mean, that would have been old for 2013, I think. I think
That would have been. You're right. You're right. You're right. Well, it's an interesting point though, because a lot of what makes a stories, it's human interaction for the most part. I mean, it's a big part of fiction. You have characters, you want to know them, feel for them, whatever. So maybe that's part of what makes a story timeless is good characterizations, even if it is a period piece and they're wearing bell-bottom jeans and telling you that's I really dig it, bro, whatever. Uh, it's still, if you can connect with the characters, maybe that's a part of what makes a story timeless. Although you look at something like Dracula, I don't know how much you really connect to any of the characters in Dracula. It's a way that story's told is completely different, but I
Oh yeah.
guess that's where the whole popularity comes in. You have a book that's been made into countless movies and stage plays. It's
Mhm.
going to be timeless because of that.
Yeah, because Dracula's bizarre. That's a
It's a little weird, yeah.
it's a weird book, and I think it was weird for its time. I too. It was very modern, which is it's just bizarre to think about. It was at the turn of the century, if I'm not mistaken. It's
I
been a
think so.
long time since I read it, but yeah, that Dracula's the reason I don't like first person books.
Yeah, it's a different one. I read it in high school. The name of epistolary or something, and the name of that style of writing through notes and newspaper articles. And that was the first time I read anything like that, and it was like a little jarring.
Mhm.
You know, I'd seen plenty of Dracula movies, and this is really bizarre.
Yeah, yeah. A lot of nothing happens for a while.
Yeah.
It's a slow burn. Um,
Yeah.
King wrote to go back to Stephen King. He wrote a weird prequel to Salem's Lot called Jerusalem's Lot. It's a short story in Night Shift. It's written like that. I remember reading that in high school and thinking, like, what is this? Because I had never read Salem's Lot.
Yeah, I read that before Salem's Lot too. I was in junior high, and I actually thought Night Shift was a novel, so I thought that was chapter one, and I was lost. And I read the second story, and I realized, wait a minute, this isn't a novel at all. These are short stories, and I don't even know what happens in Jerusalem's Lot. It went right over my head at that time.
Yeah, it's weird. We're actually about to jump into that for my Stephen King podcast.
That's a great collection.
Yeah, yeah, it'll be a nice change of pace. We just did Rage
Oh yeah,
book, which is really uncomfy,
right. Oh yeah, yeah.
especially
This day and age, yeah, Rage is for sure.
yeah. Uh, uh. um, let's see. Normally I write down questions, but I didn't because I was like, let's
Hey,
play it
flow
by
by the seat of our pants. Yeah, play it by ear. Why not?
have it be chaos. Um, what would you say is the perfect horror structure?
Ooh, perfect horror structure. Well, I don't know. I mean, I guess for me, I don't know if,
Yeah, yeah. Your opinion on.
I mean, are you talking like a, a 3-act story? Some people they get,
Yeah,
which I've kind of over the years, I kind of begun to like that. I remember asking people, what is it? What does 3-act mean? Beginning, middle, and end, I guess. And it sort of does, and that's kind of what we're taught in school. But I know that I know a lot of authors are writing stories in a different way, where it's not quite as jumbled up as Quentin Tarantino's Pulp Fiction. If you try and take Pulp Fiction and put it from beginning to end, it would actually kind of be a boring movie. It's weird. I've thought about that.
Yeah.
It'd be so different, but if you actually put it in the from point A to point Z, it'd be like, oh yeah, it'd be long periods where it was kind of weird and dull. So a lot of people are starting. I'm noticing this at least, kind of telling their story out of sequence, but in a way that makes sense. I kind of like that, and I haven't really played around with that. I don't know if it's the perfect way, but I have a feeling it's something that we'll be seeing more, and maybe just to get away from more linear storytelling. I kind of like linear storytelling. Circus Oasis is a linear story.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, that works very well. But there's something to be said about stories being told out of sequence. But and I kind of tend to like the 3-act idea of just having a solid beginning, middle, and end. But I don't think there's a perfect way to tell a story either. I think it's fun to tell stories in different ways, and that's something I'd like to play around with. And I kind of do a little bit sometimes, but I think I tend to be a more linear storyteller. It's just what I'm comfortable with. But I do like to do. I like different things, but I'm a third person point of view storyteller, and I prefer to read the third person point of view. First person, I can get into it, but it's a little bit more difficult for me. And present tense is really difficult for me. I'm not a big fan of that either.
Yeah.
So a third person past tense 3-act story. Now it sounds kind of basic. Oh, that's very fucking vanilla of you, Robert. But I guess I kind of like that. I'm starting to get into the non-sequential stories, and I think I'm going to play around with that at some point, because it's there's a lot of appeal to that appeal for me. That kind of storytelling. But present tense, though, that's a tough one. I have a hard time reading that, and I wrote a short story with present tense once, and I don't know, it was like a disaster.
I've never read any horror present tense, but I've read a lot of science fiction present tense, and I it's too much for me. I can't read. I have to listen to it. I can't pick
Yeah.
anything just straight up reading it. I'll end up reading the same chapter like 4 times, which is that's a bad sign.
It is.
I will either try to find the audiobook or I'm piecing out. Like it's not for me. I know some people who really enjoy present tense, but it's not
Yeah.
to me it's just too jarring, and you
I
have to
think,
write it well.
yeah. I
Uh,
think the idea with present tense is to keep it exciting, to keep it like on the edge of your seat, like, and I don't know. I haven't read a lot of horror that's present tense either. I seem to recall, I think Hunger Games is present tense, but I listened to that on an audiobook. But I remember thinking about it, like, man, that's I don't know if I really like the way this story's being told. You know.
I've never read it. I never read any of the Hunger Games books. I've seen the films, which were extremely frustrating to me because I really wanted gore. The number I just someone gets hit with a nail bomb in that last film, and I just wanted like the Hurt Locker status.
Right.
Of
Because that's what would have happened, right?
like I wanted. It just felt like we're going to try to be with all the fan. There's some weird fantastical things in those Hunger Games like films, but like they kind of grounded in reality. They're down and
Yeah.
dirty, but they don't because to keep that PG-13 rating, they don't take it to the absolute extreme that I
I
think.
think even with and I've only read the first book. I didn't read the other ones. It ended on a major cliffhanger, and I'm not a big fan of series, and unless I like a series where each book is its own complete arc, but
Yeah,
it's still a part of a larger arc. That's the way I prefer. Jonathan Mayberry's Rotten Ruin stories are like that. They're brilliant. I love it. It's a whole complete story. You feel satisfied, but it has this larger arc that takes you to the next one. Well, this story ended on a cliffhanger. You didn't know what happened at the end. I was so pissed off I never looked at a Hunger Games book again after that. And it was a good book. It was really good. It reminded me of movies like older Escape 2000, some old vintage, almost had a Mad Max sort of feel. I know people thrown together in some whatever. I've never seen the movies either, but the book, it was written like that. There wasn't like all this gore. It's what is it, middle grade or something? I don't know.
it's
It's
a
not
adult book.
exactly, but you read it like, if the world was really this brutal, this book would be a lot more brutal. If this stuff was really happening, it would be way more brutal in reality.
Yeah, I could see like I read not too long ago. I read the Rambo books by David Morrell, where
Oh
he
yeah.
wrote the novel First Blood. Then they made it into a film, but he had the rights to write Rambo 2 and 3, and so he wrote novelizations for it, which are so much better than the films. I can't stress that enough. Rambo 3 is an awful movie. It is so boring. Like he does
I
one
haven't
thing,
seen
it
it.
doesn't work, so he does the exact same thing a second time, and it works that time. But like in the books, you have like a religious angle where like for the second one's about Buddhism and Zen, the third one's about Islam, but you have like graphic things that happen, and it's like taken to its realistic extent. And
Yeah.
I just I just want a hair of realism. It's one of the reasons I like horror. And I like things nasty because sometimes you got to get into the nasty. You got
Yeah.
to go you can't just be like boo, oh, I got scared. I'm going to run away now. No, you got to
Yeah.
someone's got to get their entrails ripped out sometimes, you know? It's got
That's
to
right.
people got to lose an eye.
You got to get in there.
So something I've debated this with some of my friends recently. When a lot and generally people want to see good win against evil in horror, but sometimes you just there needs evil has to win. Like it makes sense. How do you ride that line of like, is it good gonna win? Is it gonna be evil? Like, how do you judge that when writing?
So, well, sometimes I feel like the story kind of dictates that. I
Mhm.
don't subscribe to an idea that evil or good has to win every story, because I hate to say that's not realistic, because come on, monsters and stuff aren't realistic either, but right, the vampires aren't realistic. But I don't know, it's it'd be kind of boring if you knew good was going to triumph in the end all the time. It'd take the drama out of it. The suspense would be gone. You go, well, I know the good guy's going to win in this one. So I have no problem with, or the good guy. Even sometimes, if good triumphs, it doesn't turn out, all squeaky clean at
Mhm.
the end either. My book, my book Death Obsessed has I was talking about how much I hate cliffhanger endings, and I think I might have done that on that one, because I have had somebody like, God, what happens to this character? And I'm like, I mean, I think it's kind of obvious, but then maybe it's not. And
Mhm.
that one, it's like, I don't know. Good doesn't triumph. I don't think it's it's not very a pleasant ending. And so I have a few books that aren't very pleasant in the end, and I don't think I've really heard much criticism about that,
Mhm.
outside of something that's kind of a cliffhanger, not really wrapped up. I try to wrap things up because I'm not a big cliffhanger guy, obviously, from what said about Hunger Games. But yeah, I don't think good has to triumph in the end, and because I don't think that's
It-
it's more interesting not knowing what's going to happen. And a lot of times when I'm writing the story, I don't know.
mhm.
Um, I'm trying to think of what I'm writing right now. I'm getting close to the end, and I can't. I can't. I think I've outlined how it ends, and I just don't remember. But I like that idea that you're not expecting what's going to happen. If you read an author, and every time it just is, just has that wonderful ending with the nice music and the credits roll. And to me, if I know that's how it's going to end, I'm not going to be interested in reading it. And
Mhm.
at the same token, if an author's get the endings are always downbeat, they're always make you feel like hell, because you're like, wow, I was depressed when I started reading this book, and now I'm doubly depressed because the world's going to hell, and this author's always telling me that. I wouldn't like that either. I
Mhm.
think that I think there should be just a good variety of different ways that stories can end.
Yeah. I'm a big fan of like creep show where you have a morality tale that's a horror
Oh
sort
yeah.
of thing where someone gets, it's fun to see someone get their comeuppance.
Oh yeah.
Um, I think that's one of those satisfying things in horror, because horror is so many different things at this point, because people I think that it's at this point like it's just a Freddy Krueger, Jason. The teenagers go to the cabin. Oh, they get butchered. I think that's still what people who don't watch or read horror think of. Like, oh,
Probably.
expl- it's just an excuse to see people be naked and then get cut in half. Like Roger Ebert and Siskel and Ebert just used to tear those movies apart. It's just the
Yeah.
excuse to stab people. like, like horror is so many different things. Like anywhere from like the extreme horror to something like psychological. You know.
Yeah. Oh
And
yeah.
have you ever like read like a horror story and you couldn't finish it, like it just made you too uncomfortable?
Absolutely. Oh yeah. I don't mind. There's I've read some Edward Lee stories that I haven't read a lot of Edward Lee, because I'm like, holy crap, he's really goes off into some really messed up territory with some of this
Yeah.
stuff. I mean, some of his mass market books, like I read a book called Monstrosity. It's not that extreme thing that he's sort of known for. But then I've read, I used to review books here and there for Splatterpunk scene, and I was given some a couple of his collections of short fiction from Deadite. Those are really brutal. And I actually had to say, you know what, I can't give these an honest review because I can't even get through these stories. You know, it's just not my my cup of tea. So really extreme stuff I'm not into. I don't mind, you know, blood and gore and violence and some extreme elements to stories and whatnot. But yeah, there's definitely some
Yeah.
territory that I'm just not interested in going and raiding.
Yeah, and people can guess that we can't say it on here. This will get flagged at this YouTube's so particular about talking
Yeah.
those sort of things. But like there's just certain lines I feel like in America you just can't cross. And like and even still like with horror, I feel like there's still a taboo about it because it really I think that good horror represents how people feel at the time or still feel. I,
Yeah.
we had the whole Saw and Hostel thing in the 2000s after 9/11. Um,
Yeah.
like, and I think we're finally getting out of that. So the
Yeah. Horror is kind of a little bit of a reflection on society, isn't it?
mhm.
At least it seems to be. It
it,
comes and goes. It has its phases historically, I guess. That horror movies, when they're popular, when they're not, they always seem to come back. Horror fiction
mhm.
has had its different moments in the sun, and yeah, that makes sense. That we had a bunch of really brutal horror movies that came out right after 9/11. Yeah.
Yeah, then unfortunately they got a little too goofy, which is a whole
Yeah.
like Saw 6. Some of that is so ludicrous that it becomes kind of a comedy because it's just so out there and it's weirdness. Or the 3D one, what was that, the seventh one?
I think I saw like four, maybe five, and that's when I stopped watching the Saw movies. I didn't
Yeah,
even know there was a 3D one. I seen the
yeah.
3D Destination though.
Oh
Those.
god. A Final Destination where they put the to differentiate from the first one because it was going to be the final one and then they made a fifth one.
Yeah,
No
yeah,
one watched that. Uh, but yeah, yeah, it's interesting. I think that there's this handful of stories that are just timeless in horror. Whether
yeah.
they warrant it or not is a whole nother thing. But I think that the Circus Oasis will is a timeless horror tale of uh, comeuppance.
Yeah, that's interesting how you mentioned the comeuppance part earlier. We're talking about sort of um, how satisfying that is, and what I hope is that story will satisfy people because there are elements in the story that I was concerned people might turn away from.
Mhm.
Some of the we'll just say without getting too detailed into it, the history behind the Circus Oasis is very brutal in a way that'll might make a lot of people uncomfortable. And I had some people read advanced copies, and one of the readers, she had sent me a message. She's like, "Oh," she put like a cry face emoji. "Oh, I just read whatever something that happened on this or that page." And I said, "Read to the end. When you get to the end, you'll feel a lot better about all this the things that happen in the with the history of this place." And then when she finished, she's like, "Oh, I love the book. Yeah, that ending was great." But a lot of that history, and I think what I hope is I didn't get too involved, didn't get too deep into some of the things that happened, and that it was more produced in your mind as you
Yeah,
read the story.
well, I don't think, and I might be reading into this too much. I don't think that's the point of Circus Oasis. The point is to a sort of unity with our main characters. Because I didn't bring up like the family drama aspects, which I think is really good, but I wanted to save that for the readers. But I think just that there's it's a book about unity and comeuppance are like the two words that
Yeah,
come to mind. And I really like that you didn't write an annoying child character. She was a cool little kid. And it wasn't like
I'm glad I didn't too.
this is I was so thankful. Like I was reading it and I'm like, oh, she becomes my favorite character. I'm not
Oh,
gonna
that's awesome.
yeah, she does logical things that a 10-year-old would do, but she doesn't do the obnoxious things an obnoxious 10-year-old would do.
Right. Yeah, I know how that is. I sometimes I've got a collection of a couple thousand old paperbacks, horror paperbacks. Pick one to read, and you'll see there was a time when there was a lot of stories that were based on telekinetic children. Probably spawned off of Stephen King with Firestarter and
And
stuff
Carrie.
like that. Yeah, yes, exactly. And I see these books, and I go, oh, if I pick one of these up, and it's just this really just irritating kid that's got these power, I don't want to read that. So I hear where you're coming from, loud and clear. You see
They're,
it in movies too.
they're usually written by people who like don't have kids or aren't around children or like that sort of thing. So they have like Stephen King in the 2000s, he like lost his touch with writing kids. Like there's that whole period like in oh god, Black House, the sequel to Talisman, that sort of thing. Like he just writes angry middle-aged people. That's like the
He,
only character he could write for a while.
he does a good job at it though, right now.
Because he got hit by a car.
Yeah.
It nearly
Oh man.
it made sense, but like when you get to I don't know if you've ever read Doctor Sleep.
No, I haven't read Doctor
I
Sleep.
highly recommend Doctor Sleep. It's a really interesting sequel to The Shining. It's what I think he was trying to do with Black House as the sequel to Talisman, but Black House doesn't quite work. That and it really ends up being tied to the Dark Tower a bit too much.
Yeah.
But like Doctor Sleep is a really interesting look at like the child character Abra is really interesting. I got that vibe from Danny in this.
Oh yeah. Okay. It's interesting what you say about it. Some of these characters seem like they're written by somebody who hasn't been around children or whatever.
Mhm.
Or have children, and you think about the older Stephen King books,
Mhm.
like Firestarter, or I think in wait a minute, Danny's the name of the kid in The Shining, isn't it?
Yes.
Wow, that's funny. What I didn't even notice that. Or like Dan, and he had young children at that time.
Yes.
And when I was writing this book, my son he's 13 now, so he's a little bit younger than Danny when I wrote it, but I definitely could glean some things off of his behavior and whatnot, which was helpful. I mean, it would be a lot more difficult to try and write a realistic child or one that isn't all annoying and just a stereotype of what someone might think children are like, because they're a lot different when you're around them all the time than when you go to like your brother's house and his kids running around and all that kind of thing. So it probably helps.
And like it's the whole the parent dynamic with the parents is done really well, and I just like Danny's perspective on things, which doesn't quite get it, but she almost doesn't want to. She doesn't want the thing to happen because parents aren't getting along, but they're on a trip for her birthday.
Yeah,
sort of thing.
You can imagine it, sometimes kids probably try and hide things and try and always look at the bright side in a way that adults sometimes we struggle looking at things the bright side the way a child can.
Yeah, and it's so you wrote all four of these, like the main characters. They're all really personable and relatable, and I really appreciate that because your villains are crazy.
Yeah.
Like when there's a point you get to the book and you're like, oh dear God, you don't know what's gonna happen.
Well, then my job here is done. That was what I was looking for.
You did good. But anyway, I think that about wraps it up here.
All right.
Thank you, Robert, for joining
Hey,
me.
I appreciate the conversation. This is a fun time.
Thank you for putting up with my my half brain. It's my last day of work today, and I started
Oh
new
yeah,
Monday, so I was a little fried coming in.
it's
But
all good. I was exhausted before we came on. I was out in the sun all week at work, so I had me some coffee and I felt good. And I think we had a good interview. I appreciate it.
thank you so much for just working with me.
Oh yeah.
So anyway, everyone, I hope you enjoyed it. Have a good evening. We'll see you next time.